Welcome, everyone, to Session 2 of Early Celtic Christianity. Just a quick review. Last week, we talked about how the Celts, or Celts, influenced the people of Ireland and Britain through trading. And when Christianity arrived, how it incorporated itself into the Celtic culture that was there in those lands. So this week, we are going to delve into the arrival of Christianity and basically where Christianity in England came from. Celtic Christianity has been conceived of with differing levels of specificity. Some writers have described a distinct Celtic church uniting the Celtic peoples and distinguishing them from the Roman Church, while others classify it as simply a set of distinctive practices occurring in those areas. Varying scholars reject the former notion, but note that there were certain traditions and practices present in both the Irish and British churches that were not seen in the wider Christian world. And that's important to understand. Such practices include a distinctive system for determining the dating of Easter, a style of monastic tonsure, as seen on the right, a unique system of penance, and the popularity of going into exile for Christ. Additionally, there were other practices that developed in certain parts of Britain and Ireland that were not known to have spread beyond particular regions. The term Celtic Christianity typically denotes the regional practices among the insular churches and their associates rather than actual theological differences. And here's where it really starts to get interesting. When Pope Gregory I sent Augustine of Canterbury and his missionaries to England in AD 596, much to Augustine's surprise, he found there was already a church. It was well established and had been for a long time. Scholars suspect since at least the 100s. So, how did Christianity get to England? Get ready to be blown away. Julius Caesar. Now I will explain. Julius Caesar was the cause of Christianity eventually coming to England. He invaded Britain between 55 and 54 BC. Fast forward, when Christianity was finally legalized in Rome, it was legalized everywhere Rome had conquered, and churches were established in those countries. I'll go into more detail on this. In AD 43, Emperor Claudius directed 4 legions to invade Britain. Now, wherever the army went, others came along. So around the Roman forts would grow up settlements with shops, blacksmiths, and other trades. Many of England's towns were started this way, including London and York. One quick note, one of the most famous defensive forts built by the Romans can still be visited today. It's in ruin, but much of the wall is still there. Hadrian's Wall in England. It used to serve as the border between Scotland and England. It was built to defend England against the barbaric tribes of the north. I've been there and toured it. It was pretty cool to see an old Roman fort in rural England. Anyway, London and York are good examples of settlements built as a result of the forts. So, when the Roman army pulled out and left England, the settlements remained. Father Hightower and I believe it to be a fact that Christianity spread fastest among the common people. Given that case, the faith was most likely introduced by the camp followers of the Roman army. So, that's the long answer. The short answer is the Roman army brought it over. Why do so many people not know this information? Why do so many not take these things into account? Well, this is probably due, at least in partial, to the church in Rome having no record of England being Christianized. That's why Pope Gregory I sent Augustine to Christianize England, because he thought it had not been. He had no idea how well established the church was in England. And what baffles my mind, and the minds of many others, is that Rome kept records of everything. From the time of the ancient Roman Empire, good records were kept, and there were no records of an established church in England. These things obviously fell through the cracks. According to medieval traditions, Christianity arrived in Britain in the 1st or 2nd century. One such story recounts how Joseph of Arimathea arrived in England and planted his staff at Glastonbury where it bloomed. The earliest historical evidence of Christianity among the native Britons is found in the writings of such early Christian fathers as Tertullian and Origen in the first years of the 3rd century, although the first Christian communities probably were established some decades earlier. Tertullian wrote that Britain had already received and accepted the gospel in his lifetime. Eusebius of Caesarea, one of the earliest and most comprehensive of church historians, wrote of Christ's disciples in Demonstratio Evangelica, saying that some have crossed the ocean and reached the Isles of Britain. St. Hilary of Poitiers also wrote that the apostles had built churches and that the gospel had passed into Britain. The writings of Pseudo-Hippolytus include a list of the 70 disciples whom Jesus sent forth in Luke 10, one of which is Aristobulus of Romans 16:10, called Bishop of Britain. A number of references to the church in Roman Britain are also found in the writings of 4th century Christian fathers. There are many famous religious figures that predate Augustine of Canterbury. St. Alban, who was the first Christian martyr. St. Patrick, who Christianized Ireland in the 5th century. And just a quick note, they say that St. Patrick drove out the snakes in Ireland. Well, snakes is a metaphor for paganism. So, St. Patrick Christianized Ireland. That's what he did. There was also St. Brigid, charity worker and founder of 2 monastic communities in Ireland, one for men and one for women. And St. Columba, an early 6th century Irish abbot and missionary known for helping to Christianize Scotland, just to name a few. Lastly, I would like to elaborate more on St. Columba because I feel he's a very important figure who fits into all this. St. Columba sailed from Ireland to Scotland to bring the gospel to the pagan natives living there. He landed on the Isle of Iona on the west coast and founded a monastery. It is said that the famous manuscript, the Book of Kells, was produced by Columban monks from Iona. Some say it was even produced on Iona itself by the monks living there. St. Columba's monastery thrived for a long time until it was attacked by the Vikings whenever they went on their violent conquests. However, the monastery was rebuilt and managed to survive until the end of the 12th century, despite repeated Viking raids. Around AD 1200, the sons of Somerled, king of the Isles, founded a Benedictine abbey here. It was founded where the monastery stood, and that is what is known as Iona Abbey today. There was also a nunnery founded around the same time just down the road from the abbey. It was an Augustinian convent, actually. Pilgrimage to Iona Abbey, to St. Columba's shrine, actually. It's famous to go on pilgrimages to Iona Abbey to St. Columba's shrine, and that practice continued to thrive even after monastic life on Iona ended with the Scottish Reformation of 1560. After that, the Catholics left. The abbey started to fall into decay. And that it was that way until the Iona community, formed in 1938, restored the building and revived the abbey's long tradition of work, worship, and teaching. The nunnery, however, is no more. It has long fallen into ruin. I have been to Iona, and I've walked these sacred grounds where St. Columba walked and taught the gospel. According to tradition, he had a small hut that stood on a mound just right outside the abbey where he used to devote time to study and writing. The mound is still there. And right outside the front of the abbey is a small chapel where anyone can go and pray. It's believed that under this chapel is the final resting place of St. Columba. This picture right here is one that I took of the small altar inside. It's a sacred little room. I, along with 3 others who were accompanying me on this trip, sat in there late one night, and it was a spiritual experience I'll never forget. If any of you ever get a chance, I strongly encourage you to make a pilgrimage or just a simple trip to Iona to see these places. It's breathtaking. I plan to take my family there one day, once this pandemic is over. So that's the conclusion of Session 2. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see all of you again next week for Session 3. Until then, God bless.